Hey, dreamers, welcome back to your Dream Coach podcast. I'm Shayla Wey. I'm a small business coach, growth strategist, and believer that your dream life starts the moment you lead like you mean it. This podcast is where we explore the intersection of leadership, fulfillment, and growth. Because success doesn't mean much if it costs you your joy and your purpose. And so today we're diving into one of the most powerful shifts that I've made as a leader and coach, and how great leaders create space for growth in themselves, in their teams, and really in their businesses. Because leadership isn't just always about pushing people harder. I believe it's about creating an environment where people want to level up. They want to rise higher. They want to improve. And when you learn to lead beyond limits, your own and others, you stop micromanaging and you start multiplying. And you move from this place of control to collaboration, and really from this place of pressure to potential. And that shift changes everything. And before we dive in, if you haven't already joined the LFG Business Academy on School, it's completely free. And it's really where I share deeper trainings, tools, resources, and it's a community of conversations to help you grow your business with more leadership, fulfillment, and growth. And you can also get access to my mini leadership series. It's just a short but powerful training that helps you lead like a CEO without losing yourself in the process. The links are in the show notes, so you can go grab it. And I want to jump in. So I want to kick off by just diving into this idea that I used to really believe that being a strong leader meant just driving results, having these ambitious goals and targets always, and keeping everybody moving. Now, I definitely know that we have to have goals and targets in business, absolutely. But if you're not familiar with the emotional cycle of change, what I want to bring into this part of this conversation is that when something is new, whether it's a new product, a new project, maybe it's even just a new role for somebody, there's always that initial spark that people are very excited about. But eventually, as humans, that shiny object does get a little bit dull at some point. And so if we can recognize that as a leader, we have to find ways to keep people excited and engaged and challenged without just that place of pressure. Because leading with pressure does have a limit. And eventually people hit burnout, they might quit, they might leave, or they're just going to be really complacent and they're not going to do the work at the level that we want it to be done. So even ourselves, we can really only be stretched so far before we just break, instead of build. And so the real growth happens when we stop filling every gap ourselves and really start creating space for other people to step in. And so that moment that you stop being the bottleneck and you start to be the bridge, it's huge. And when you start to lead this way, what happens is people start to step up because they want to be a part of something bigger. I truly believe that most people, when they are really tied into the goals, they appreciate the leader, they want to be a part of something bigger. A big part of fulfillment is growth. And so when we stop, when we move people from pushing them to really doing more to empower them to become more, it's a huge shift in the way that you lead people. And so it's not always about how much we can get out of people. It's about how much potential you can draw out of them. I've had some clients lately where I've talked to them about really micromanaging schedules and managing hours. And, I challenge that thinking a little bit, because is the objective to have an employee work every single minute and micromanage it? Or is the bigger leadership challenge here is this is what I need to get done. Doesn't matter how you get it done, but it needs to be accomplished. And personally, when I got to that place of leadership where I just set out my objectives, my goals, my standards, to me, it didn't really matter for most of the things that had to get done, how it got done. It just had to get done. And if it took someone 2 hours, it took someone 10 hours, at the end of the day, just find a way to figure it out. And I think that autonomy, a little bit of that flexibility and that confidence that leader can give to somebody is massive when it comes to culture and leadership. And that's, I think, what really means to lead beyond limits. And sometimes as leaders, we want to focus more on that expansion, right? We want to focus on expanding and growth, not always just the simplicity of expectations. And so what I mean by that is I found that expectations can sometimes create a bit of fear, but expansion creates freedom. And so that's what I was just talking about, is that if we can, as a leader, say, okay, these are the goals, these are the projects, these are standards, like we still want to obviously grow and have these targets. But when we lead from just a place of expectation, people can play smaller. And what I mean by that is an example would be today, XYZ has to get done. and if this doesn't, this is going to be a problem, right? More of that fear-based. But if we say, hey, what's going to be really exciting is if we do XYZ today, that puts us on pace to be on target for the month. And how amazing would that be because of XYZ? So having more of that positive leadership, thinking about expanding and growth versus just being small-minded, micromanaging, and expectation. Because when we lead from expansion, you are inviting people to grow, to develop, to have ownership, be innovative, and they often will exceed at that. And I've seen this in every kind of team, sales teams, small businesses, corporate leadership. People rise to the environment that they're in. And your job as a leader isn't just to set expectations, it's to expand them by creating the conditions where people believe more is possible. And that looks like empowering them to make decisions instead of seeking permission. This one used to be such a pet peeve of mine. I used to just give people the answers. And I remember one of my leaders telling me that, Shayla, you can teach people to fish or you can fish for them. You got to make that decision. And although sometimes as a leader, it takes a little bit more time, a little bit more patience to pause and teach somebody how to fish in this example versus always giving the answers, at the end of the day, that's going to empower them, which is going to build their confidence. And they start to make decisions, which again takes more off of your plate. And I would always rather see a person make a decision and in certain situations, right? But make a decision that was a small one and make a mistake that always have to come to me or come to that leader and ask because they were too scared to ever make a decision because they were too worried about messing up. And so when we coach people through mistakes instead of punishing them, that's how people are going to learn. I think sometimes we forget that, especially if we've been a leader for a long time. We can be really quick to get frustrated because we're like, well, why wouldn't you just know that? Well, people, how did we learn to get to where we are? And so if we are always just pointing out what's not going good, that can become really negative. So we want to recognize effort just as much as outcomes. Is, hey, I know we didn't hit XYZ target, but I just want to say I really commend you on coming in early and doing everything you could to move the needle further, right? There's always ways that we can encourage people. And when people feel good about what they're doing, they're going to always put in that effort over time if they're in alignment with that culture. And growth is just not going to happen in fear. It's going to happen more when we have more of that freedom. Now, we talk a lot about stretching people to their potential, and building a culture where people can stretch without snapping is exactly where we want to be. Because what I found is that most businesses overstretch and they undersupport. And so we can't just challenge people. You have to champion them. So that means really creating those systems that I talk about all the time and safety that allow people to try new things, to actually grow into leadership and to develop confidence. So in my coaching business, I've learned that the right mix of challenge and care is everything. If you only challenge people, they will burn out. But if you only care for people, they'll just stay stagnant. And when you have a bit of a balance of both, when people feel supported and stretched, that's where growth thrives. And it's the same for you as a leader. So stretch yourself, but don't snap yourself. And that's why boundaries, the rest, the clarity are non-negotiable parts of sustainable leadership. And empowerment is going to start with trust. And this was a game changer for me. If you can't empower people, then they don't trust you. Okay? So we can't get to a place of empowerment if they don't have that trust with us. Okay? We also can't trust them if you're constantly trying to control them. So I've learned that I found that I guess a lack of trust creates a cycle of dependency. So your team relies on you for every decision, every approval, and every step. And soon you're working 80 hours a week doing everyone else's job, and nothing can get done without you. So that turning point for me, and a big turning point I see when leaders are ready to level up to that next level of growth in their business, is learning that trust is built through clarity. When your team knows exactly what success looks like, they feel confident what they're supposed to do. And even when they're making mistakes, they step up. And so empowerment isn't just giving people more to do, it's giving them ownership over how to do it. And that's what creates long-term loyalty, creativity, and a really, really solid culture. Now, there's one thing I've learned about great teams around mindset is that growth mindset is the oxygen of a great team. When leaders are frustrated, when businesses are stagnant, when employees are just really complacent, it's because we're not growing. We're stuck as a leader. We've been doing things consistently the same over and over and over again, and we're not going to get any better results. So when you lead from this place of possibility, your team will start to think that way too. And so when you approach challenges with curiosity instead of panic, they follow suit. So a growth mindset is contagious because it turns setbacks into lessons, failures into feedback, and obstacles into opportunities. And I've just found that one of the best ways to build a growth culture is to normalize learning out loud. So when you share what you're learning, not just what you know, but you model that leadership is about progress, not perfection, that's how you create a safe space where people innovate, they experiment, and they evolve. So make room for your own growth too, because as you're growing, as you're learning, and that's so key because your team will see that, they'll model that. And the thing for many leaders that we forget is while we're creating space for others to grow, we also need to create that space. And so I've worked with so many business owners who spend all their time developing their teams, but never themselves. And I always find it fascinating when someone reaches out to me about coaching and they say, my team needs help. They're not good at this. They don't do that. And, I don't say this obviously in my first meeting that it's a reflection of them, but there's definitely been some hard conversations I've had to have with business owners and leaders is that, well, what are you doing to grow? You can point the finger all you want, but if we're not pouring into ourselves and we're just focusing on the team, then our growth becomes stagnant. And so even as a leader, we always have to keep that at the forefront is how are we growing? How are we learning? How are we progressing so that we can drive the business forward too? And we just can't expand a company or business without expanding the leadership. And that could be the CEO or that could just be the leadership team in general. So again, just make time for your own reflection, your own learning, and your own coaching. Because the moment that you stop growing, honestly, your team will stop believing that growth is even possible. And that's why leadership development is one of the highest return investments that you can make in yourself, in your business, and in your success. And as we create space for fulfillment, that is so key because this is really a huge part of one of my fulfillment pillars that I coach on is that we have to make that space not just to function. Because leading beyond limits doesn't just mean creating space for performance. It really does mean creating space for purpose. People crave meaning. They want to know their work matters. And when they find fulfillment in what they do, they bring a different level of energy, creativity, and ownership to it. And I've found that fulfillment grows when people feel three things. They feel connected, they feel challenged, and they feel celebrated. So they feel connected to the mission and to each other. They feel challenged with purpose, not pressure. And they feel celebrated for progress, not perfection. And I just feel like it's very similar to raising kids, as if we're always focused on what someone's not doing well. My gosh, our kids would never grow. We celebrate, the little wins. And it's the same thing in a leadership with a team, is that as a leader, when you create those conditions, you don't have to push people. They will propel themselves. And I've built cultures and teams with this philosophy many times. And it's so much fun when you don't operate from a place of scarcity. It's that place of abundance and positive energy, because we can create a lot of amazing things with that right mindset. And growth without humanity isn't growth. And I think sometimes in business, we get so focused on metrics, milestones, outcomes that we really forget what leadership really is. And it's about people. It's about people. We can only go so far with, just ourselves. We need teams. We need departments. We need these things to be able to grow thriving businesses. And I found that growth that sacrifices humanity isn't sustainable. So if your team is achieving record sales, but they're burnt out, they're losing joy, that's not winning, to me anyways. And if you're scaling your business but losing your peace, that's not success. Leading beyond limits means remembering that people aren't performance machines. They're human beings with dreams, emotions, and potential. And so when you build with humanity, you build something that lasts. And here's one of the hardest truths I've learned is that your business, your team, and your growth will only rise to the level of your leadership. Your leadership sets the ceiling. So you set that emotional tone, that culture, that pace. And when you're calm, people feel safe. When you're intentional, people feel clarity. And when you're growing, people feel permission to grow. Leading beyond limits starts with leading yourself beyond yours. And that means staying humble. It means staying curious and open no matter how far that you've come. And the best leaders don't create followers. They create other leaders. I remember learning this years and years and years ago. And I love that. Is I used to think, well, if I create more leaders, then they'll take over this role. And it's like, no, absolutely not. Is that we want to create leaders. That's one of the best compliments you can get as a leader, is creating other leaders. And when you lead beyond limits, you multiply your impact and you stop being the center of everything. And instead, you become the catalyst for others' success. And this is how businesses grow sustainably. This is how culture thrives. And this is really how you build a legacy, not by what you do, but by who you empower to do it after you. That's leadership at the highest form. And when your influence continues, even when you're not in the room, man, that is one of the best feelings, the best compliments you can ever get as a leader. And so if you take one thing from today, let it be this: is leadership isn't about how much you can handle. It's about how much space you can hold. Space for others to rise, space for yourself to evolve, space for your business to breathe. And when you lead beyond limits, you create expansion for everyone. And that's what turns good businesses into great ones. So if this episode resonated, I'd love to invite you to join the LFG Business Academy on School. It's completely free. And it's really short and powerful, the leadership series you get on there. But it really is the perfect next step if you're ready to lead with more clarity, confidence, and just more calm. So you can use the link in the show notes, and I'd love to see you inside that space. Thanks again for tuning in to today's episode of your Dream Coach podcast. If this message inspired you, share it with someone who's ready to lead beyond limits. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and tag me on Instagram at Shayla Wey Coaching. I would love to hear what resonated most for you. And remember, your dream life starts with the way you lead, the way you live, and the way you grow. I will see you next time on your Dream Coach podcast.